There is a moment in every museum visit when the room gets quiet in a very specific way, as if the air has taken a breath and decided not to release it. The chatter fades, the footsteps blur into a soft hush, and one frame pulls you more than the rest. Your eyes meet a painted gaze or the shadow of a gaze, and a small, precise chill runs along the back of the neck. No alarms, no jump scare, just the unmistakable feeling of being seen. That feeling is older than galleries and grand tours. It is older than oil and canvas. It is the animal part of us checking the night for watchers, carried across centuries into a ritual space with velvet ropes and plaques. And it is the reason certain works refuse to behave like objects. They act like someone in the room. Painters have known this secret longer than scientists had language for it. The human brain has little choice but to lock onto eyes, even when the eyes are only a suggestion. A few dark strokes placed just so will trigger the sense of presence, and once presence is established, the rest of the painting can press on deeper doors. This is where the difference between an impressive picture and a haunting one resides. An impressive picture occupies your attention. A haunting picture occupies your attention and then occupies you. Consider the world Henry Fuseli paints when he lets night settle over a room and weighs it down with something heavy and nameless. The sleeping figure, spilled across the bed like a wave that has finally broken. The small creature perched upon the chest, all malice and curiosity compressed into a grin. That is the part most people remember, the famous incubus with its squat menace. But stay with the frame a little longer and watch where the gaze actually goes. It hops from the demon to the hanging arm to the crushed breath of the sleeper and back again, only to be torn by a spill of hoarse muzzle and white eyes bursting from the velvet dark like a thought you were trying not to think. The horse seems impossible until you admit that nightmares are impossible in exactly that way. They arrive with the logic of sensation rather than the logic of daylight, and Fuseli paints that logic without apology. The more you look, the more your own body participates. You feel the weight on your chest. You feel the room's stale heat. You feel watched. Why does it work so well? Part of the answer belongs to physiology. Your visual system is tuned to hunt for faces and especially for eyes. Even a hint of a gaze can commandeer attention and hold it captive long enough for the rest of the scene to move into the center of your awareness. Another part of the answer belongs to psychology and the territory Carl Jung charted with stubborn patience. He proposed that the masks we wear for the world are necessary, but they are not the whole of us. Behind those masks is a region made of what we cannot accept about ourselves, the traits we disown, the impulses we deny, the memories we fold into shadow. That region does not vanish when ignored. It waits, and it looks for mirrors willing to host it. The right painting offers itself as exactly that kind of mirror, and down in the quiet of the museum, you feel the trait occur. You project, the canvas receives, and then the gaze that returns to you carries the shape of what you sent. This is why certain works feel like an accusation, while others feel like a confession. That distinction does not always live in the paint. It often lives in the watcher. You may stand before Fuseli and feel a childish fear of being caught off guard while sleeping, or you may feel the more adult dread of what presses on your chest when you refuse to name it during the day. The demon is a mask for both. The horse is the violent thought that insists on entering anyway. The woman is the breath you lose when your mind chooses paralysis over acknowledgement. Nightmares are honest in a way we rarely are. The painting holds the honesty still long enough to be examined, which is both mercy and cruelty. Now let the room change and grow colder stone by stone. You are no longer in a chamber with delicate fabrics and personal dread. You are somewhere brutal, somewhere echoing. Francisco Goya's vision stands there, massive and hungry, and it does not need to blink to consume you. The old god grips his child, as if the body weighs nothing and everything at once. The mouth is wide with a hunger that does not belong to the stomach. It belongs to a world where power eats what it fears. It belongs to a father who devours his future before the future devours him. The light does something terrible in this painting. It does not comfort. It clarifies. The arms are white. The eyes are more white still, and the darkness presses around the figure as if the night itself cannot bear to touch him. You feel the same primitive detection system kick on, but this time the gaze you sense is not on you. It is beside you. You and the painter stand together, witnessing a myth that refuses to soften into story. You are complicit in the seeing. That is its own kind of horror. Goya painted those black works on his walls as if he no longer needed the world's permission to say what he knew. He knew that terror is not a theatrical flourish. It is an economy. Something always feeds on something. And the most frightening truth is how often the feeder and the food share a face. Jung would nod at this point. He would say that when we refuse to integrate our own shadow, it does not disappear. It grows teeth and a clever appetite. It devours from within. Goya gives that process a body. He makes a god of it not to flatter it, but to make its scale visible. The effect on a viewer is immediate. You stand there, and the boundaries between myth and family, between legend and daily appetite, falter for a second. Your pulse hesitates. You feel watched not by the god, but by the truth that the god names. Between Fuseli's bedroom and Goya's cavern, there is a corridor that runs through all of us. We walk it in the early hours when the house has stopped making noise and the mind starts again. Paintings that live in this corridor do not scare in the shallow sense. They don't simply jolt. They disturb patience. They do not allow you to treat fear as a toy. They ask questions your daylight persona would rather postpone. What have you been feeding? What sits on your chest that you call stress when the word is actually grief? What bursts through the curtains of your reason with white eyes and refuses to be excluded from the story? The sense of being seen intensifies when the composition arranges itself like a stage for that encounter. Artists often angle bodies toward the viewer while letting the light anchor everything to a single axis that runs through the eyes. The result is a gravitational pull. You feel aligned whether you consent or not. Then there is texture. Smooth skin lit, like wet marble, tells a different truth than rough strokes that let darkness leak through. The former tempts you into idealization. The latter holds you in unease. Neither is neutral. Both can be used to make the painting lean toward you. And then there is the oldest trick of all, the slight misalignment that keeps the gaze alive as you move. Portraitists found a way to place pupils so they maintain contact across angles. But even without a face, the same principle applies. A spotlight in a dark room can act like an eye. A circular void can do it too. The mind whispers watcher and the body obeys. You slow down. You attend. In that attention, the painting earns time, and time is the real canvas. The longer you stay, the more material the work has to reach you. Patience is a medium often more important than paint. We talk about art as if it were passive, as if the museum closes around it each night and the works fall asleep. But some paintings are built like ongoing questions. They are machines for attention. They are rituals disguised as pictures. The ritual begins with the hook of the gaze and ends wherever your honesty will allow it to end. Maybe you accept that you are tired of carrying a fear you refuse to describe. Maybe you realize your cruelty is not a stranger, but a frightened part of you rehearsing control. Maybe you admit that the story you tell about your family has missing pages because those pages are stained. The canvas will not report you. It doesn't have to. It already knows. It has seen thousands of people arrive with masks and leave with the masks slightly cracked. That is why I trust certain rooms more than certain conversations. The rooms hold work that keeps its promises. Goya promises to show you what power does to a soul that believes it must devour to survive. Fuseli promises to show you what happens when the uninvited visitor of the night sits where breath should be. They keep those promises without gossip or cruelty. They let you watch safely and then ask quietly whether safety is the right word. There is a practical courage in looking this way, not the cinematic bravado that poses with fear for a photograph, but the steadier kind that stays with a feeling long enough to learn what it wants. If terror arrives first as a gaze, it often leaves as a name. You name the weight on your chest. You name the appetite that calls itself love when it is possession. You name the urge to look away and the deeper urge not to live that way anymore. The paintings do not heal you. They do something harder. They make your self-deception feel expensive. People sometimes ask whether it is healthy to spend time with dark art, as if the mind were a delicate glass that fogs at the first touch of honest weather. I think the better question is how to spend time with it. Go in with the steadiness you bring to a night walk. Let your breathing be the metronome. Notice what your eyes do before your thoughts build their little lecture. If your attention lands on an eye, a mouth, a hand, do not drag it away. Stay long enough to see whether the feeling sharpens or softens. Most fear erodes under accurate naming. What remains after the erosion is meaningful. It is the part that is asking for action. The long tradition of memento mori understood this without lab tests or arguments. Place a skull next to a goblet and a wilted flower, and you have not made a threat. You have made a reminder. Time is a current. You are in it whether you look or not. Awareness is not a bruise. It is a light source. The reminder is not a sadistic prank played by gloomy painters. It is an invitation to the only kind of freedom that grows in the dark, the freedom that comes with clear sight. When the museum opens again and the quiet becomes a public murmur, none of this disappears. The crowd does not cancel the private contract between you and the work. It only tests it. If the painting holds, you will feel that private gaze even with a guide speaking near you and a group shuffling past. That is how you know you have found one of the keepers, a work that wants to go home with you in that very specific way that art does. It will not ask for a wall. It will ask for an hour at night every now and then. When you let the room dim and decide to be watched for a while by something that cannot gossip about you or betray you or grow bored. The painting will do what it was built to do. It will hold your projection gently, and then it will return it to you with a slightly different shape. That shape is the beginning of choice. Fuseli and Goya are not the same kind of guide, but together they sketch a map of the territory this series will travel. One shows what it feels like to be the stage where the uninvited actor performs. The other shows what it looks like when hunger pretends to be destiny. Between them runs a path of gazes, and along that path we will meet other frames that know how to stare without eyes. Doors and arches that act like pupils. Bodies turned just off-center, so their attention slides across you like a blade that has decided not to cut yet. Water lit, so it forms a perfect oval of brightness full of implication. The techniques are varied. The effect is ancient. You are not alone in the room. You never were. If this unnerves you, good. Unease is not the enemy. Indifference is. The point is not to shock yourself for sport or to collect creepy trivia for a party. The point is to practice a different relationship with looking, one that treats attention as a promise rather than a grab. Paintings like these keep their promises if you keep yours. Bring presence. Bring patience. Bring a willingness to be seen in ways that do not flatter you. If you do, the works will repay you with something better than a scare. They will repay you with a kind of companionship that knows how to sit with the night without demanding that the sun defend itself. By the time you step back from Goya's cavern or lean away from Fuseli's bed, the room will have resumed its civilized tone. The lights will feel slightly too bright. The audio guide will seem a little silly. That's fine. Daylight has its own rituals, and we need them. But there is a reason you will think about that gaze later, in your own house, when the hallway turns long and the clock decides to take its time. You are not only looking at a painting. You are meeting a part of yourself that only comes out when it is safe to be honest. And despite everything, a good frame can be a very safe place for honesty. So keep the promise. Return to the work that refuses to be quiet. Let it look. Let it return what you send with a touch more truth than you packed. That exchange is not a trick of pigment and varnish. It is an old human technology for surviving the night. 2 breaths, and the room keeps the echo of what we have already seen, the heavy quiet of the nightmare, and the cavern where hunger learned to speak. But the night is not finished with us yet. Those paintings stared without shame, direct as a hand on your shoulder at midnight. Now we step into a slower kind of gaze, the kind that does not announce itself with a face, but still finds a way to look at you. This is the territory where the eye you feel does not always belong to a person. Sometimes it belongs to an angle. Sometimes it belongs to time. Sometimes it belongs to your own mind, completing what the painter only suggested. Stay with me, and I will show you how a few pieces of light in the right place can call up a presence, how a single step to the side can change what a picture is saying, and how a rose beside a skull can quiet a room without a single word. There is a grand portrait in London that teaches this lesson better than any lecture. 2 men stand shoulder to shoulder, wrapped in fine cloth and surrounded by the tools of learning, globes and instruments and books laid out like proofs of order. The air is calm, the authority unshaken, the world properly arranged. And then your eye catches a long gray smear stretched strangely across the floor. It looks like a mistake until you move. Shift your feet a little, let your body participate, and the smear snaps into a skull so sharp you feel your pulse stutter. The painter is Hans Holbein the Younger. The work is known as The Ambassadors, and what it does to you is simple and perfect. It makes you feel how a change in perspective turns a polished world into a world that admits its limits. That skull is not an afterthought. It is the whole sentence hidden in a flourish. It says what we avoid saying out loud. It says that every display of mastery stands next to the same fact, that time will take everything on the table, and that the mind only sees it when it is willing to stand in a different place. You do not just notice the message. You enact it. Your body performs the revelation, and because your body performs it, you remember. That is how the best pictures behave when they want to awaken you without shouting. They enlist you. They ask you to step, to tilt, to linger, to let the eyes rest on something that does not look like a face, yet still works like one. The brain cannot help itself here. It is tuned to hunt for watchers. Give it 2 dark marks placed where eyes would be and a curve where a mouth could be, and it will bring the rest, not to fool you, but to keep you safe. That ancient promise is why a coat on a chair can lift the hair on your arms in a dim hallway. It is why a lamp reflected in a window at night can feel like a person standing too close. Painters discovered long ago that if they placed shapes and lights so the notion of a face hovered just beyond certainty, your attention would flood the scene and hold it steady while meaning had time to arrive. The effect is not a prank. It is a collaboration. You bring life to the canvas, and the canvas gives it back with a new shape. This habit of completing faces has a name. People who study the mind call it pareidolia, but you do not need the word to feel what it does. You feel it when you stare at a cloud that looks like a profile and cannot unsee it. You feel it when you glance at a wall outlet and your nervous system reports a startled expression. Certain artists paint as if they are tuning that reflex like an instrument. They refuse to draw a clean smile. They refuse to carve a proper eyelid. They let the surface fray and blur so that you are the one who finishes the expression. The more you try to fix it, the more the image slips and returns, and soon the picture seems to breathe, not because it is alive, but because you cannot stop supplying breath. If you want to witness this dance in a darker register, look at the work of Zdzislaw Beksinski. He builds worlds out of textures that sit right on the edge of recognition. Ribs drift into torn fabric, ash into hair, a hollow into an eye that may not be an eye at all. The figures, when they appear, are missing pieces that you cannot resist replacing. The scene becomes a mirror for the watcher's unease. You feel the urge to name what you are seeing grow stronger precisely because the painter refuses to resolve it. This is the moment when a painting feels like a presence without presenting a face. Your nervous system leans forward, seeking a witness or a threat, and in that lean the picture has you. It does not need to blink. It only needs you to keep looking. But the night is not only shapes that hint at faces. The night also loves simple objects, arranged with enough care to turn a table into a sermon. In the Dutch Golden Age, painters returned again and again to a quiet kind of still life known as Vanitas. The word sounds heavy, but the idea is gentle and exact. A skull rests beside a rose. An hourglass keeps its slow promise. A book lies open to a page that no one is reading anymore. A goblet catches a small oval of light that looks suspiciously like an eye, and in that oval your attention finds itself reflected. Painters such as Harman Steenwick arrange these objects with an elegance that refuses melodrama. Philippe de Champagne did it with almost monastic precision, lining a skull, a tulip, and an hourglass in a row so clean the picture feels like a sentence with no wasted words. Nothing in these scenes tries to shock you. Nothing tries to flatter you. The point is not fright. The point is honesty. Beauty exists, the rose says. Time exists, the hourglass answers. Flesh fails, the skull finishes. When you see all three together, something in you relaxes, because you are no longer fighting the truth with half a story. Set one of these still lives into your night, and the room will change temperature. The hush will feel different. The hush will feel earned. If the rose is fresh, its tenderness will sharpen the bone beside it. If the rose has begun to bend, its decline will soften the message and make it kinder. The hourglass is never shouting. It just keeps working. Some versions swap the glass for a watch or a clock, but the meaning holds. We are not made of stone. We are made of hours. When a viewer meets that reminder in candlelight, when the gold of a goblet softly answers the browns and creams of book and bone, the effect is not despair. It is priority. You walk away thinking less about doom and more about what deserves your best while you still have it. If it seems strange that art about death can make you calmer, consider the difference between the fear that creeps in a house where nothing is named and the steadiness that fills a room where the important things are on the table. The brain does not love uncertainty. It overfills it with bad guesses. When you let a painting hold the facts for you, your nervous system stops shouting and starts listening. A skull beside a rose is not cruelty. It is compassion that does not lie. It says that love is real and that endings are real and that these truths are not enemies. Put them side by side, and you create a balance that supports actual courage. All of this still ties back to the sense of being looked at, even when the canvas shows no living eyes. A circle of light in the right place will behave like a pupil. Two small glints in a dark area will behave like a stare. A white bone against black cloth will pull your gaze as surely as a spotlight in a theater. When artists understand that pull, they can compose a path for your attention to follow. Bright to dark, soft to sharp, across a diagonal that feels like a decision. Your body reads that path before your thoughts do, and by the time your thoughts catch up, your breath has already changed. That is why some pictures feel like someone is in there, even when the only figures are fruit and glass and a page. Your attention is doing what it was designed to do. It is making the world answer back. Return for a moment to Holbein's room of instruments and velvet. After you have seen the skull from the angle that reveals it, returning to the front makes the whole room look different. The men have not moved, yet the triumph in their posture now contains a thread of humility. The tools that once shouted precision now whisper context. This is what a shift in perspective can do, not only to an image, but to your life. You learn to ask where you are standing before you decide what is true. You learn to accept that a step to the side might change the story completely. You learn to welcome that change rather than fear it, because it replaces a polished lie with a complicated truth that you can actually use. Carry that lesson into the still lives, and you will notice another detail. The reflections in polished metal do more than show off technique. They create little eyes that belong to the room itself, small ovals of awareness waiting wherever the light decides to land. The effect is subtle. It can anchor you without demanding attention. If you want your viewer to feel watched without feeling attacked, show them those reflections slowly. Let the camera drift in until the oval flares. Then let it drift back while your voice stays even. The body will do the rest. And when the chapter turns toward the darker modern visions, keep the same contract with the listener. Tell them plainly that their mind is finishing faces that the painter only hinted at. Invite them to notice when their own imagination supplies the stare. This turns panic into curiosity. It turns the question from "Am I safe?" to "What exactly am I seeing?" That small change matters. Curiosity gives you time. Time lets you notice which part of the image hooked you first. Was it a circular hollow that behaves like an eye? Was it a gap in cloth that reads as a mouth? Was it the rhythm of ribs that looks like teeth? Once you know, the fear loses its claws. It becomes information. You can work with information. There is a reason nights go easier when you learn this way of looking. Houses are full of angles and shadows that can borrow our reflex for faces. If you have practiced in front of vanitas and nightmares and impossible skulls on marble floors, you will recognize the pattern quicker at home. The coat will be a coat again, not a figure. The window will be a window again, not a stranger's outline. And if your mind conjures a watcher anyway, you will know what to do. Breathe. Shift a little. Find the angle that makes things honest. Let the truth click into place the way the skull clicked into place when you stepped aside for Holbein. The body loves that click. It is the sound of the room telling the truth. This is also why these paintings belong in the same story, even if they come from different centuries and speak different dialects. They are all teaching the same deeper skill. Look long enough to let the picture look back. Let your perspective be movable. Accept that your attention is part of the artwork. Honor the reminders that time places in your path. None of that requires a museum. A kitchen can do it. A train window can do it. A quiet screen at night can do it if you let the image breathe and do not rush to fill the silence with chatter. When you bring these works into a film, give the viewer a path that feels like a vow. Begin with a room that tests perspective and lets the skull arrive only when the body chooses to stand in a new place. Slide into tables where bone and bloom and clock share a single patient light. Let the camera float over glass until the room's small eye opens. Then lead them into textures that refuse to decide whether they are cloth or flesh until the mind decides for them and discovers, with a start, that it has been drawing the face it feared. Speak softly. Trust the pictures to do their part. You are not selling a scare. You are building a kind of night vision. By the time this chapter closes, the listener should feel less haunted and more equipped. They will know that the gaze they feel in front of a canvas can be explained without breaking the spell. They will know the names of the currents moving under their attention, not to show off, but to steer. Perspective can be chosen. Faces can be unlearned as easily as learned. Time can stand next to beauty without ruining it. A picture can carry a skull without becoming cruel. A painting can feel alive because we are alive, and that is not a weakness. It is a strength that lets art do its work. You can test this the next time a museum door opens and that particular quiet settles on your shoulders. Walk toward the confident displays. Let yourself be impressed. Then step to the side and see what appears. Walk toward the humble tables where simple objects shine. Let yourself be calmed. Then listen for the undertone that asks what matters to you while the glass keeps counting grains. Walk toward the troubled canvases where forms blur and refuse to behave. Let yourself be unsettled. Then narrow your attention to the exact place that started the fear and wait for it to say its name. If you do these things, the night gives ground. The watchers in the dark become guides. The faces you thought were traps become doors. And if you carry one picture out of this room, let it be the most ordinary one. The steady, still life where a flower leans toward a skull while time keeps time in the corner. It contains the whole program in a single breath. Look, accept, choose. The rest of the series will add texture and distance and myth, but the center will remain here, where honesty and tenderness are allowed to sit at the same table. That is the gaze you have been feeling all along. It is not a curse. It is the soft attention of a world that wants you awake. Imagine a canvas painted with hardly anything on it at all, only a pale horizon and a figure so small that the surrounding void becomes the real subject. In Caspar David Friedrich's Monk by the Sea, the land is stripped to a bare shore, the sky a crushing sheet of gray-blue that offers no comfort, no detail, no handhold for the eye. A single monk stands at the bottom edge, facing the sea, facing the endless. You may expect to feel power in this solitude, but most people feel something else first. They feel watched, not by a god or a human, but by the sheer immensity of space, by the silence so dense it seems aware of you. This is the first lesson of shadow on a grand scale. When detail disappears, your body invents an attention pressing back. The void becomes an eye, and you are its subject. Arnold Böcklin painted the same lesson with darker water and a stranger boat. The Isle of the Dead shows a small vessel gliding toward a rocky island. The passenger a white figure standing stiff as marble, the cargo a coffin. The island rises like a fortress of trees and cliffs, dark, forbidding, punctured with what might be windows or might be graves. There is no explicit face here, but try to look away. The island itself behaves like a watcher. Its vertical walls rise around the water like a jaw closing. The stillness of the boat moving in silence becomes unbearable because it feels aimed, not at the island, but at you. This is why Böcklin's painting was reproduced in so many versions and found in so many parlors and offices. People did not hang it to be frightened. They hung it because it offered the strange comfort of being held inside a gaze larger than themselves. The reminder that the journey is not random, that even death sure is approached as if someone or something is waiting. If in the still lives of Vanitas we saw objects on a table working as reminders, in Friedrich and Böcklin we see space itself become a table on which the self is placed. You are the object arranged for contemplation. The expanse of sea, the fortress of rock, the crushing sky, all of them stage you as the central fragile detail. The gaze is not painted, but it is felt because of scale. Small against great, silent against louder silence. Presence born from imbalance. This effect intensifies when shadows themselves take shape. Many painters have understood that darkness is not empty, it is articulate. Fuseli showed us nightmare creatures pressing through curtains, but there are subtler performances. A doorway painted almost shut, with a spill of light crossing the floor, feels inhabited even when no figure stands in the gap. The mind supplies the inhabitant. A hallway receding into gloom behaves like a stair pointed outward, the vanishing point doubling as an iris. The more you try to treat these as geometry, the more your body insists they are alive. You cannot walk away without checking, as if the picture might move once your back is turned. Consider again Böcklin's island. The black holes punched into its rock walls are only shadows, yet they act like sockets in a skull. Once the association lands, you cannot unsee it. The entire island becomes a head rising from the water, its gaze spread across the viewer. This is the same pareidolia that turned Beksinski's textures into faces, but here the scale makes it monumental. You are no longer completing a blur of cloth into a mouth. You are completing a cliff into a skull large enough to contain silence itself. And in that act of completion, you feel the weight of being observed by something immeasurable. The Romantic painters knew this feeling intimately. They stood in landscapes at dawn and dusk and wrote that they felt the universe looking through them. Their art was not about pretty trees or heroic vistas. It was about the immensity that dwarfs us until we become honest. Friedrich's Monk by the Sea was called bleak, even ugly, when it first appeared. Viewers did not know what to make of a canvas so empty, but that emptiness was the point. The absence of detail created the presence of scale, and the presence of scale created the gaze. The viewer became the subject of the painting's attention, not the monk, not the sea. You. This is why shadows and spaces work so powerfully in the language of dreams. When you dream of a hallway that extends without end, you often wake with the sense of having been seen, not by anyone in particular, but by the hallway itself. When you dream of water stretching beyond your sight, the unease is not only from drowning, but from being small against something so vast it seems intentional. Painters capture that dream logic and fix it on canvas, so you can practice the gaze without drowning. You can sit with the vast silence and learn what it says to you when you are willing to listen. What does it say? Sometimes it says nothing at all, and that nothing is enough to rearrange you. Sometimes it whispers the oldest truth: you are not the center. Sometimes it whispers the opposite: because you feel so small, you have never been more aware of yourself. That paradox, the simultaneous annihilation and intensification of self, is what makes these paintings linger. You are less, but because you are less, you feel more. Your skin, your breath, your heartbeat, all of them flare against the canvas because they are the only details left. In this way, the shadow paintings do not scold. They recalibrate. They teach you how to stand in front of immensity without collapsing. They show you that emptiness is not a void but a gaze that demands patience. And they remind you that patience is not the absence of action but the presence of attention. When you stand before a Friedrich or a Böcklin, you are not wasting time. You are entering the oldest human practice, the one where we stared into forests and seas and skies and felt them stare back until we grew steadier. The gaze of shadow also shows up in smaller forms. A candlelit room painted with one corner swallowed in black will feel inhabited even if the artist left it blank. The mind insists on filling it, and the filled presence looks at you. Caravaggio knew this well. His chiaroscuro made darkness lean against figures so that the unseen half of the room behaved like a character. You feel it watch. You feel it wait. Even a fruit still life, when half the table vanishes into shadow, creates the tension that something is hiding just out of sight. The eyes your mind supplies in that shadow are yours, but they feel borrowed. Why should we spend so much time with this sense of being watched by space and shadow? Because it teaches humility without humiliation. Because it trains the nervous system to stay calm in presence of the unknown. Because it turns dread into dialogue. The more you stand before silence, the more you realize it is not empty. It is an invitation. It asks you to acknowledge scale, to acknowledge time, to acknowledge the parts of life that will never reduce themselves to answers. In doing so, it makes you more honest with yourself. You can see this honesty in the reception of Böcklin's Isle of the Dead. People hung it in bedrooms and offices not because they were morbid, but because the painting offered a steady reminder that even endings belong to a path, not a chaos. The gaze of that island is not hostile. It is final, yes, but it is final in a way that organizes. You cannot look at it without imagining yourself in the boat, without rehearsing the journey, without feeling that someone is ready to meet you. That readiness is not comfort in the usual sense. It is comfort in the sense that the story is larger than you, and larger stories are steadier to live inside. So the third step in our walk through the night is not about faces that frighten or objects that remind. It is about spaces that stare. It is about learning how shadows and emptiness perform attention. This is the slowest gaze of all, the one that takes its time, the one that insists you do the same. By now you know what to do. You breathe. You stay. You let the silence hold you until you can name what you are feeling. You understand that the watcher you sense is not always a figure. Sometimes it is a cliff. Sometimes it is a horizon. Sometimes it is the dark itself. And once you know that, the world is full of gazes you can answer with steadier eyes. When you leave these shadowed canvases, you carry their training into your own nights. The long hallway of your house feels less threatening because you have practiced its gaze. The sea of your own thoughts feels less endless because you have rehearsed standing on Friedrich's shore. The inevitable coffin in Böcklin's boat feels less cruel because you have accepted that even death can be framed as arrival rather than disappearance. And when you turn off the last light and let the room fall into its own shape, you no longer ask whether someone is watching. You accept that the night itself is watching, and that acceptance is not fear. It is peace, deep and patient, the kind that lets you close your eyes knowing that the dark has always been looking, and it always will. At some point in our journey through the labyrinth of images, the paintings stop being only paintings. They become thresholds. A frame of wood and canvas no longer holds them. Instead, they breathe, expand, and swallow us. You think you are standing in front of a rectangle on the wall, but then the rectangle becomes a door, and the door becomes a passage, and the passage pulls you in with the quiet gravity of a dream. The face in the shadows is no longer looking back at you. It is inviting you, almost daring you, to cross over into its world. This is not an abstract claim. People have felt it for centuries. When viewers first stood before Caspar David Friedrich's Monk by the Sea, they reported dizziness, even a kind of nausea. There is nothing on that canvas except a thin strip of earth, a monk reduced to a dot, and an infinite sky over an infinite sea. Yet the void seems alive. It watches you. It breathes at you. It makes you question where the canvas ends and where you begin. In the silence of that scene, you sense a gaze, not your gaze, but something larger, impersonal, timeless, asking questions you cannot answer. And when you turn away, part of you feels you have abandoned someone who is still speaking to you. The same sensation haunts Arnold Böcklin's Isle of the Dead. There is the boat, the figure draped in white, the coffin, and that dark island with trees like sentinels. But look longer, and the island is not an island. It is a body. The rock face shows holes like eyes. The cypresses rise like ribs. The whole mass stares back at you, silently announcing that death is not just an idea. It is a presence. And the strange thing is that it is not only threatening, it is also consoling. Because in that darkness, you feel you are not alone. Death has a face, and even if it is stern, it is there with you. Why do these images affect us so strongly? Why does a painted rock or a black sea suddenly become more than it is? The answer lies not only in the artist, but in us. Our brains are trained to find faces where none exist, to recognize patterns in clouds, in bark, in shadows on the ceiling. Psychologists call it pareidolia, but for centuries before science gave it a name, people already knew it in their bones. They saw Christ's face in the knot of a tree, a demon in the corner of the fireplace smoke, a lost lover in the folds of a curtain. To call it illusion is to miss the point. For the one who sees, it is real. It carries weight. It changes how you breathe. That is why artists deliberately provoked it. Take Zdzislaw Beksinski, the Polish painter of nightmares. His canvases are landscapes of decay, ruined towers, deserts of bones. And always, in the chaos, something half-recognizable emerges. A skull without eyes, a shrouded figure, a face almost human but not quite. The longer you look, the more it completes itself in your mind. The painting is unfinished until you supply the final detail, and that detail is the echo of your own fears. Beksinski once said he painted what he feared. But the real terror is that we see our own fear mirrored there, wearing his forms like masks. This is why standing before these works is not passive. You do not only consume them, you collaborate. You lend them your breath. You give them pieces of your memory, and they give back a vision of your own mortality. That is what makes Vanitas' still lives so unsettling, even though they seem so quiet, so orderly. A skull beside a flower, a watch beside a book. Harmless objects, but when arranged just so, they whisper. The skull is you, the flower is your youth, the book is your unfinished story, and the clock is ticking even as you stand here. You laugh at first, thinking it is too obvious, but then you feel that tick 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 inside your own chest, and the joke is not funny anymore. Art, at its most powerful, is never just art. It is ritual. Think of Mexican altars on Dia de los Muertos, covered in marigolds and sugar skulls. Or Tibetan Thangka paintings, mandalas that monks destroy in the end to remind us of impermanence. These are not decorations. They are thresholds, too. They remind us that images are living things when we let them be. They demand that we not just look, but enter. And once entered, you cannot unsee. This is also why some paintings repel us. Francisco Goya's black paintings, smeared on the walls of his own house, were never meant for a gallery. They were confessions, nightmares he could not silence. In Saturn Devouring His Son, the god's eyes bulge like a cornered animal. His teeth tear into his child's body, blood dripping from his mouth. You recoil, you want to turn away. But the longer you stand, the more those eyes lock on you. It is not Saturn anymore. It is hunger itself, insatiable, pitiless, and somehow human. And it asks you, without words, what have you devoured in your own life? What have you sacrificed just to survive? That is the danger of art that looks back. It does not allow you to stay innocent. It pulls confessions out of you. Edvard Munch's The Scream is almost too famous to be scary anymore. It is on mugs, t-shirts, emojis. But stand before it in silence, and the soundlessness is unbearable. The figure is not screaming. It is the world itself that is howling, bending around the figure, twisting sky and water into soundless vibration. And when you realize that, you feel the pressure in your own throat, the scream you never let out, the one that vibrates inside your bones at 3 a.m. when you cannot sleep. That is why it still works. That is why it still looks at you. René Magritte understood this from the opposite side. His faces are hidden under cloth, or replaced with apples, or dissolved into clouds. He knew that the absence of a face is more disturbing than the presence of one. Two lovers kissing with their heads covered in white fabric are more haunting than any grotesque mask. Because in that cloth, in that refusal to show, your mind paints its own version. Who are they? What is under there? Why does the image feel both tender and suffocating? And suddenly you are the one under the cloth, gasping for air, desperate for intimacy, terrified of suffocation. Magritte holds up the mirror, and you are reflected in absence. This is what links all these works, across centuries, across styles. They remind us that we are not the sole observers in the universe. Something watches us back. Call it God, call it death, call it the unconscious, call it the void. The name does not matter. What matters is that the paintings train us to feel it, to remember it, to acknowledge it. And that is why, when you leave the museum and step into the daylight, the world itself looks different. Shadows are deeper. Faces in crowds are stranger. The wind in the trees sounds like whispers. You have crossed the threshold, and you cannot return unchanged. The beauty of it is that you do not need to be a philosopher or an art historian to feel this. You can be an ordinary visitor, an American dad on a family trip to New York, walking through the MoMA half distracted by your kids. You pass by Dalí's melting clocks and laugh at them like cartoons. But then one of the clocks seems too real, too soft, too alive, and you pause. For a second you imagine time itself is liquefying, dripping over the edge of your own body. The joke is no longer a joke. Or maybe you are a college student rushing through a class assignment, glancing at Hopper's Nighthawks. You think it is just a diner scene, ordinary people in silence. But the longer you stare, the more the glass becomes a wall, the figures prisoners of loneliness, and you realize you are staring into your own late-night solitude. Suddenly, the painting is staring at you. That is the gift. That is the curse. We do not escape images. They travel with us, infiltrate our dreams, invade our silence. Long after the gallery is closed, the monk by the sea, the scream on the bridge, the cloth over the lover's face, they sit with us in the dark. They whisper, they accuse, they console, and they remind us that the world is not mute. It is alive with watching eyes. Every shadow might be a mask. Every reflection might be another self. Every painting might be a mirror. And if we are brave enough, we keep looking back. There is a moment when art stops being just something you look at, and it becomes something that looks through you. That shift often happens with mirrors, reflections, or doubles. We think of mirrors as neutral, as passive glass. But in paintings, they are never neutral. They are traps, portals, eyes disguised as silver surfaces. The artist paints a mirror not to show you what is in front of it, but to remind you that someone, somewhere, is always behind you. Take Jan van Eyck's Arnolfini portrait. At first glance it is simple, a man and a woman holding hands in a quiet room, a dog at their feet, a chandelier above. But then you notice the convex mirror on the wall. In it, two tiny figures appear, one of them the painter himself. You are not only looking at the couple, you are being watched by the mirror and by Van Eyck across centuries. That circular eye is still open, still recording, still implicating you. You thought you were invisible, but you were in the picture all along. Diego Velázquez plays the same game in Las Meninas. The Infanta and her ladies look out of the painting, while Velázquez himself stands behind the easel, brush in hand. A mirror on the back wall reflects the king and queen. Who is the real subject? The princess? The painter? The monarchs? Or is it you, standing in the place of the royal gaze, forced into the scene whether you wanted it or not? The painting is a puzzle that rearranges itself around your presence, like a labyrinth of glances. Every time you look, you become part of the composition. You are not safe outside the frame. You are inside it. This unsettling inclusion is what makes reflective art so powerful. It does not allow you the distance of a neutral observer. You are pulled into the story. You are implicated. Caravaggio's canvases do the same, though without mirrors. His figures, bathed in violent light and shadow, reach out of the canvas, their hands extending into our space. St. Matthew, startled as the angel points at him, looks as shocked as if you were the one suddenly chosen. The light does not stop at the paint. It spills out, it strikes you, it makes you the next actor in the drama. But mirrors, especially, have a special charge. Consider Edouard Manet's bar at the Folies Bergerac. The barmaid stares at us, blank, weary, and yet behind her, the mirror shows a man she seems to be serving, a man we cannot see directly. The space is fractured, ambiguous, unstable. You question what is real, who is speaking to whom, and whether you are the customer or just another reflection. The painting becomes a stage where your own gaze is rehearsed and distorted. The surrealists understood this danger of reflections more than anyone. René Magritte again and again painted men whose faces were erased, or whose backs were turned, or whose mirrors showed not their faces but the backs of their heads. The refusal of recognition is itself recognition. You look, and you see nothing. You look harder, and the nothingness turns into your own outline. The canvas is mocking you. Do you know yourself at all, or are you only another stranger in a series of copies? Salvador Dalí carried this further. His melting clocks, yes, are famous, but his portraits often hide doubles, faces embedded inside landscapes, torsos becoming towers. He makes you complicit in the illusion. Once you see the hidden image, you cannot unsee it, and the whole picture shifts. This is not passive observation. It is participation in hallucination. The canvas is a machine for tricking your senses, and you willingly surrender to it. The face in the rocks, the eyes in the sky, the double figure in the shadows, all of them remind you that your vision is not reliable. And if your vision is not reliable, what about your memory? What about your very sense of self? This is the deep theme of doubling in art. Identity is unstable. We like to think we are one person, solid and indivisible. But stand before James Ensor's masks, or the Venetian carnival portraits of Tiepolo, and you feel how easily one face slides into another. The mask is not a lie. It is a second truth. When Magritte hides the lovers' faces under cloth, he is not denying intimacy. He is showing that intimacy is always haunted by mystery. You never see the other fully. You never even see yourself fully. The mirror always lies. The mask always tells. Even in modern photography, this pattern persists. Think of Diane Arbus, whose portraits of twins unsettle not because they are grotesque, but because they are almost identical and yet not quite. That tiny sliver of difference between them is more disturbing than total sameness. It makes you wonder, which one am I? Which one is real? Which one is the shadow? And which one is me? The camera, like the brush, is only a tool for forcing us to face the double that has always lived with us. Why does this disturb us so deeply? Because the double threatens the illusion of control. If there is another version of me, maybe I am not unique. If there is another gaze watching me, maybe I am not free. And if the mirror looks back, maybe I am the reflection, not the original. This is the vertigo that paintings from Van Eyck to Magritte exploit. They remind us that seeing and being seen are never separate. To look is to be looked at. To observe is to confess. For the everyday viewer, this might sound abstract, but it never feels abstract when you stand in front of the canvas. In a museum in Washington, you stop before a mirror in an old Flemish portrait, and you suddenly glimpse yourself there. Not literally, you are not in the paint, but emotionally, you feel implicated. You realize someone 500 years ago set a trap for you, and you walked into it. Or you sit in a college lecture hall, half bored, when Los Meninas appears on the screen, and for a second you feel the monarch's weight on your shoulders. You are the king. You are the queen. You are the one being looked at. It is not theory. It is pressure. It is presence. And it lingers. This is why art has always been dangerous. It dissolves boundaries we thought were solid. The frame, the mirror, the mask, they all break down the wall between here and there, between viewer and viewed. And when that wall collapses, we discover we are not alone. We are accompanied by doubles, shadows, hidden watchers. Some comfort us, some accuse us, but none leave us untouched. That is why, centuries later, these works still command us. Van Eyck's mirror, Velázquez's labyrinth of glances, Manet's fractured bar, Magritte's faceless men, Dalí's doubles. Each one proves the same point. We cannot hide in the role of spectator. We are always participants. We are always inside the frame. And once you realize that, the world itself becomes uncanny. Every window is a possible mirror. Every stranger is a possible double. Every silence hides a gaze. And every night, when you close your eyes, you feel the reflection waiting in the dark. There comes a point in every journey through art when you realize the paintings are no longer about themselves. They are about you. Every skull, every flower, every mirror and mask, every scream and silence. They have all been rehearsals, ways of preparing you for that moment when you finally accept that you are inside the frame. You are not outside looking in. You are the subject. You are the vanishing point. And you are also the witness. Think about it. From Holbein's hidden skull to Velázquez's labyrinth of gazes, from Goya's monstrous Saturn to Magritte's faceless lovers, from Dalí's clocks dripping over the edge of reality to Hopper's lonely diner, the thread has been the same. Art is never passive. It demands your complicity. It forces you to recognize that what you see is not only on the canvas, but also in your own chest. That is why the works endure. That is why they still unsettle. Because we carry the echo of their eyes long after we leave them. Caspar David Friedrich showed us the abyss of sky and sea, and we felt the infinite pressing down on our tiny bodies. Böcklin ferried us to the Isle of the Dead, and we knew that death was not abstract, but a presence waiting. Goya showed us hunger devouring its own children, and we saw our own cruelty mirrored there. Munch's silent scream reminded us of our midnight anxiety, the one no one else hears, but which lives in every heartbeat. Magritte mocked our desire for certainty, showing us cloth and apples where faces should be. And Hopper revealed the solitude hiding in neon light, the isolation that even coffee and company cannot cure. But here's the twist. These paintings are not only warnings. They are not only mirrors of mortality and despair. They are also maps. They guide us through the labyrinth of fear toward a strange kind of freedom. Because once you admit the abyss is looking back at you, you no longer need to pretend you are untouched. Once you accept the double, the mask, the reflection, you realize you are larger than the mask. Once you let the scream vibrate through you, you no longer fear it breaking you. Art takes us to the darkest corridors not to leave us there, but to remind us that even in those corridors, light follows. The brushstroke itself is light. The canvas itself is proof that someone, somewhere, chose to make meaning instead of silence. This is why we keep returning. This is why we fill museums and galleries, even in an age of endless digital distractions. Because we are hungry not only for entertainment, but for recognition. We want to see our fears named, our shadows reflected, our questions echoed. And when we find them on a canvas, we are less alone. Even in the face of death, we find community with the artist, with the generations of viewers who stood before us, with the millions who will come after. We are part of a conversation that began centuries ago and will not end with us. In the end, every painting is a paradox. It is flat, but it opens into depth. It is silent, but it speaks. It is still, but it moves us. It is old, but it feels urgent. That paradox is also the paradox of our own existence, fragile and temporary, yet filled with infinite echoes. The skull beside the flower, the scream beside the silence, the mirror beside the empty frame. These are not opposites. They are reminders that life is always both. We are always both, living and dying, present and absent, seen and unseen. And in that tension lies our humanity. So, as we close this long midnight walk through images and shadows, I want you to pause for just a moment. Picture the faces we have met, the monks staring into the void, the masked lovers, the diner trapped behind glass, the melting clock bending toward nothing. They are not gone when you close this video. They remain with you. They will appear in your dreams, in your reflections, in the corner of your eye when you least expect it. And that is their gift. They make you aware that life is more than surfaces, that behind every surface is another gaze, that you, too, are a work of art in progress. And now I will ask something simple. If this journey stirred something in you, if you felt even for a moment that a painting looked back and touched your own hidden fears or hopes, let me know. Share your thoughts in the comments. Tell me which image stayed with you, which gaze followed you, which canvas whispered your name. Because when you speak, the conversation continues. And if you want to keep walking deeper into these midnight paradoxes, exploring shadows, dreams, archetypes, and the mysteries that haunt us all, subscribe to this channel. Join the circle of those who cannot sleep because the questions are too loud, but who also know that in the darkness, we are not alone. This is the promise of art, and this is the promise of this channel. To keep asking, to keep looking, to keep listening to the silence that stares back. So subscribe, comment, share, and together we will keep walking through the labyrinth. Not to escape it, but to learn how to live inside it, bravely, honestly, and awake.